who feel that there is something broken in their life that needs to be fixed. The Bible is very consistent with this. The idea that the broken person is more likely to recognize the need for repair than the guy who's doing great. I think this is why the Bible says that it's hard for the rich guy to get to heaven, because the rich guy feels, I'm doing great. And so it doesn't surprise me entirely that broken people lean to Christianity. But I want to ask you this question. Would you not agree that the secular values that we find, for example, in Europe, the secular values we would find in Massachusetts, have themselves a Christian root? Here's what I mean. You made jokes earlier about pedophilia and so on. If I was talking earlier in my own speech about how we see Athens through the eyes of Jerusalem. You only have to go back and look at Athens without Jerusalem to realize that not just homosexuality, but pederasty was a normal part of life in Athens. And in fact, in Plato's Symposium, one of the characters even defends it, and not only defends it, he thinks that pedophilia is a little unfair to the older guy. This is the character. So what I'm getting at here is this. Isn't it true that the secular so-called values that you appeal to show the deficiency of the Christians, are themselves Christian? In other words, that Europe, although pagan perhaps or atheist in its current practice, is still inhabiting a culture formed by Christianity. See, this was the point the philosopher Nietzsche made. He said, look, he said, Western man thinks that you can kill God and keep everything else. You can kill God and keep Christian morality, keep equality, keep the idea of the family, keep the idea of compassion. Nietzsche said no. He said, you remove the foundation and the rest of it will stay for a while, a decade, a century, by habit, but eventually it'll start crumbling. And I would suggest that as our society has become more secular, we do see values newly introduced by Christianity, for example, the respect for human life, begin to erode at the edges. I mean, today no one would justify mass killing, but on the other hand, would it surprise you totally if 30 years from now people felt that once you are weak and frail and cannot support yourself, you have a duty to die? I can see a value like that creeping back into our society. If so, it would reflect the delayed legacy of the death of God, according to Nietzsche. So here's my point. How do you expect to preserve Christian morality without Christianity?
Okay. Well, that's a two-part question. The first part on the Paul study that I cited that you referenced. So I'll take out my debater's hat for a minute and put on my social science hat. It's not clear which way the causal vector goes, whether extreme religiosity in developed democracies leads to more STDs and abortions and so on, or whether those societal ills, perhaps driven by economic problems, and then those economic problems, let's say great disparity between wealth and poverty, leads more people to become religious, particularly on the lower economic strata. And that's what leads to this increase in religiosity. So this is what my liberal social science friends think is the explanation for that study, is that because America is not only yes, it's very religious, but there's also a huge, great disparity between the rich and the poor, and our safety net for those who fall through the cracks is not very good. Although conservatives think it's getting worse, it's going in the wrong direction. But nevertheless, so it's not clear to me which way the causal arrow goes. But whatever religion does, apparently it is not controlling for those sorts of things. Now, I'll give you a point that Hitchens makes in his book that he'll probably bring up if you ask him that question, and that is, even to the extent that parts of Christianity throughout history have gotten us to a certain level, the fact that we rode there on a horse doesn't mean we can't get off the horse and now start driving a car. That is the vehicle that gets you somewhere. That may just be true, but that doesn't mean we have to keep using that. So why not take the parts of Christianity and Judaism and all the other religions that we see have value, dump the ridiculous stuff, stoning to death disobedient children, all these other idiotic stories that we would no longer ever embrace today, and then move on and use the best we can, do the best we can. We're all on this journey together, trying to find answers to problems.
I don't think you have to resort to secularism to be able to see that even within morality, there is development. In other words, I think there's nothing in Christianity that denies the idea of moral progress. Moral progress would basically refer to not the invention of a new principle, but a widening franchise of its application. And so, for example, the founders say all men are created equal, but that applies in a very narrow way. In the Civil War, that orbit is extended and slavery is abolished. In the Civil Rights Movement, another religious movement again, and again, a fairly recent one. My point is not necessarily the fact that Martin Luther King was a minister or something like that. It's rather that his argument is in and of its nature moral and religious.
But wasn't Gandhi his role model?
Yeah, but it was. But Gandhi got his own concept of nonviolence from Thoreau, and in other words, Gandhi himself leaned on Jesus and Thoreau. So you have a very interesting symbiosis here.
Yeah, right. So you take parts of this religion, and the culture moves forward. This sort of cultural zeitgeist continues to progress. Religion's part of it. Sometimes it contributes, sometimes it doesn't. Secularity sometimes contributes, sometimes doesn't. And we're just trying to struggle to do the best we can. Well, I guess to include...
Well,
here's what we're trying to do, I think, is we're trying to take the in-group and make it so big that there's no longer any out-group members, because that's the problem, is tribalism.
That notion of the in-group...
Dinesh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Might the moderator be respected?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Let's go for the...
Okay, sure. And in fact, this is quite a bit longer than I intended to go, but I appreciate you all expressing your opinion on where to go with it. At this point, though, I would like to take questions from the audience. Prior to doing so, and as you approach the microphone, please see that you adhere to what I request of you. Firstly, I do ask that you take time to carefully frame your question. Often writing it down helps. And please, in fact, I will cut you off if you continue dialogue. I will force you to obey the moderator. And so, with that being said, just one question. Please carefully frame it. And we do not permit statements. This is, of course, time for the scholars to speak and you to ask the questions. So, please, the microphones are at the front. Approach the front if you have a question, and I will call on you to ask the question.
Is this on?
Yeah, he'll turn it on. Go ahead. I think if you start talking.
Okay. Hello?
There you go.
Yes, first of all, I really do want to say that I'm an atheist for Jesus and spent 13 and a half years in the Bible Belt in Upper East Tennessee, and I can guarantee you that the Christians are relatively intolerant of atheists in that area, having lost friends after they found out I was an atheist. During the time of Jesus in Jerusalem, there was a lot of Jewish people who were fighting one another. And in fact, part of the reason I would consider myself an atheist for Jesus is Jesus was living in this time, and if you listen to what he says that in Matthew 23, he talks about the Pharisees, and these, of course, were Jewish people. So the pillars of Judaism out of which this come were people who were killing each other inside the walled cities in Jerusalem, and Jesus was really upset with the pillars of Judaism at that time. And
sir, please get to the question.
Okay, so I want to ask you, with that sort of trouble in mind, and the fact that Hitler himself was really a Christian, how do you look at the Christian religion in some parts of it which have caused great trouble, and the Christian religion which in other parts has done well in the world?
Since my position on the Atheist for Jesus movement is one of mere mystification, I will zoom in to your proposition that Hitler was a Christian. You should read a book called Hitler's Table Talk, which is an extended discussion of Hitler's private statements, recorded diaries of Hitler as kept by his closest aides. Those are important because Hitler was in a largely Lutheran and partially Catholic country. Initially, Hitler tried to cut a deal with the churches, failed, and then relentlessly persecuted them. But you see from Hitler's Table Talk that he was very clearly a pagan, and by a pagan, what I mean is an atheist of this sort. The ancient pagans believed in Zeus and Baal. They believed in those gods. Hitler's paganism was secular. Ultimately, Hitler's commitment was to a racial ideology that was secular in nature, that sought to destroy the power of religion because he saw that power of religion as a competing force in society. You should read Richard Weikart's book, From Darwin to Hitler. The roots of Nazism were in two strains of thought. On the one hand, a social Darwinism, and on the other hand, a Nietzschean strain that exalted the Superman. I do not for one second think that Darwin or Nietzsche would have approved of Hitler. My point is that the Nazis approved of them and drew on these secular strains in order to concoct a fantastic and destructive ideology that first of all targeted the Jews, not for religious reasons, but for racial reasons, and the churches, which were the second target in Hitler's sights.
Excuse me, sir, I'm sorry. You're not allowed. This is not a dialogue. I'm sorry. In fact, thank you for the question. I'm sorry.
You read his early speeches.
Dr. Shermer, would you care to...
Well, my response is that, as I said, people are tribal and xenophobic and nasty in certain circumstances, and I think religion or no religion, political leaders will be land grabbers and so forth. I think atheism, theism is irrelevant. If all that was gone, dictators would still rise, people would still try to get power, and I think anyway, that's my opinion on that.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for you. Just really quickly, is your daughter, is she a Christian? Does she believe in God?
She's a Christian. She believes in God.
Okay. Let's say that she grows up to be a teenager and really strongly has a strong faith for God. But what if she became attracted to women because that's how she truly felt? How would you feel? Do you think that God would really not love her? Or do you feel that you would lose some love for her?
I would answer both those questions no.
Can I answer that for you? That's what I'm going to talk about.
Pardon?
Can I answer that for you?
You want to answer it for me?
No.
You can answer it for yourself.
Well, the reason
I'm not sure where you're going with this, but I would say no. I don't believe I would lose any love for her, and I don't think God would either.
Well, the reason I ask
Again, I'm sorry. Please, just ask your question.